Good afternoon. My name is Bryn Dechert Crooks, and I'm a nurse practitioner at the University of Michigan. I'm excited to be here today. I'm going to be discussing picking the right device for your patient. I did take a little bit of a different spin on this topic, and we'll focus on manufacturer variations in programming and which ones are better for children. I will say that I do not have any disclosures, and we do utilize all device companies at the University of Michigan. I'm certainly not proposing that you switch or supporting one company over another, simply talking about manufacturer variations. To start, when we think about pediatric device selection, we think about several things: diagnosis, venous anatomy, where the leads can go, the patient's size and the anticipated growth, their activity level, cosmetic concerns, the long-term implications during a lifetime of device therapy, and that does include risk for extraction as they get older, and sharing decisions with the patient. In this picture here, this is one of our patients who's a diver, and she had a lot of stipulation about where the device would go and what her scar would look at. All of these things are very important when we discuss device selection, but I'll have you know that there's some great information in the 2021 PACES Expert Consensus Statement on the indications and management of cardiovascular implantable electronic devices in pediatrics. This came out in 2021 and it nicely summarizes all these things that we just discussed. Again, what I'm going to be focusing on is device considerations for children based on manufacturers. The things I think are important for children are: 1, minimizing the burden of ventricular pacing; 2, the longevity of the device in leads, and that would decrease the number of procedures that children need to have; the size of the battery; and remote monitoring capabilities. These are 2 patients that I take care of, and we know that these little guys need devices that work for them. I love how the picture on the right shows that he's drawn a smiley face over his pacemaker generator. It is part of him. To start, we're going to focus on burden of ventricular pacing. As we know, a high burden of ventricular pacing can lead to pacemaker-induced cardiomyopathy in both children and adults. In the late 1990s, there was efforts to reduce ventricular pacing. Adult trials showed that overpacing contributed to heart failure and atrial fibrillation. This was important in children too. We also learned that the site of ventricular lead can have major impact on ventricular mechanical synchrony, and we now often focus on other types of pacing and where we put the lead. Medtronic MVP, or managed ventricular pacing, was approved in 2004 after only 2 small trials showed that this was safe and effective and also decreased ventricular pacing burden. It was then put on the market in 2005. Soon after, other companies followed suit. So again, Medtronic managed ventricular pacing was launched in 2005 with an upgrade in 2017, and it functions by loss of conduction. Boston Scientific, or Rhythm IQ is the name, was launched in 2012, and it provides VVI backup. The last 3 function on AV delay: Biotronic IRS Plus, which stands for intrinsic rhythm support; St. Jude AICS is automatic intrinsic conduction support, was launched in 2006, and then ELA Soren has AAI Safe R2, which was launched in 2003. How do these work individually? So Medtronic managed ventricular pacing provides atrial-based pacing with ventricular backup. If AV conduction is lost, the device is designed to switch to a DDDR or DDD mode. With complete heart block, it will drop 1 beat every 16 hours, which is an AV conduction. And obviously with intermittent heart block, this can be a very good thing for our patient to decrease the risk of ventricular pacing. With long PR intervals, the pacemaker will remain in the AAIR or AAI mode. I will admit that patients with 2-to-1 heart block, this type of function is very challenging for the device to follow and usually ends up in a DDD mode. In the pictures here, the top right, this is the AAI or primary mode of operation. It's atrial-based pacing allowing intrinsic conduction. Here, it's an A-sense V-sense rhythm switching to an A-paced V-sense rhythm. In the second picture in the middle, ventricular pacing is only used as needed in the presence of transient loss of conduction. There's a V-paced beat right in the center when there is a transient loss of conduction. The last picture is a switch from an AAI to a temporary DDD mode. The ventricular support is lost if AV conduction is persistent. So 2 out of the 4 most recent AA intervals with no conducted ventricular sense events would switch the device to a DDD mode. Rhythm IQ operates in an AAI mode with normal conduction, similar to Medtronic. Has VVI backup that's always running and switches to a DDD mode when conduction is detected. Its algorithm uses AV Search Plus to periodically check for intrinsic conduction. Similar, these pictures here, the first or normal is AAI with VVI backup. Then there's loss of AV synchrony switching to a DDD mode, and then back if there's AV synchrony restored. The last 3 that I talked about, Biotronic, St. Jude, and Soren, use the AV delay function. This periodically extends the AV delays to search for intrinsic conduction. When conduction is present, the delays remain extended to promote intrinsic conduction. If there isn't conduction, the ventricular pacing occurs in a DDD mode. This picture here shows the PR interval that extends, which allows for searching of intrinsic conduction. The second thing I wanted to talk about was automatic threshold management. And this comes into play by decreasing the risk or the need for surgery for children. So we want battery longevity, also lead longevity, but today I'm going to focus on battery longevity. Automatic threshold management accounts for the varying thresholds. Automatic threshold management has shown to be safe and effective. It's reliable in most patients, greater than 85%, I think probably more so now. It does improve battery longevity. It decreases the risk of non-capture and also decreases the need for in-office interrogation and adjustment. There's a small risk of undersensing of evoked potentials for ventricular threshold, leading to inappropriate inhibition of pacing. This occurs in about 5% of patients. With faster pediatric rates, as we know our kids run faster than adults, automatic threshold management may not be able to run because of these rates, and the device won't go faster than their intrinsic rate. Automatic threshold management works on the approximation of 2 things. 1, chronaxy, which is the minimum time for an electric current, double the strength of rheobase for stimulation. Rheobase is the lowest intensity with infinite pulse width. This is important for anyone to learn if you're studying for IBRI. This is something that you'll definitely find on the exam. The graph here to the right does show this, and for those of you who work with Medtronic, do remember prior devices did give you a strength duration curve, and it was based on, again, chronaxy and rheobase. Ventricular capture assesses the evoked response during the 110 millisecond following a pace beat. For atrial capture, there can be 2 methods that can be used. The first is atrial chamber reset. This observes how the sinus rate is affected by a pace beat. You must have a stable sinus rhythm for this to work. The second is atrioventricular conduction, which observes the AV conduction time. Automatic threshold management is present in all of the device companies. Medtronic is capture management. Its threshold search is programmable, and it runs every 15 minutes to 12 hours. It does have a programmable safety margin. It does not detect loss of capture and does not function beat to beat. And it has backup pacing present. Boston Scientific or Pace Safe. The threshold search is not programmable. It runs every 21 hours. It does run beat to beat at 0.5 volts above the threshold, and it does detect loss of capture, and it does provide backup pacing. St. Jude or auto capture is very similar. The threshold search is programmable. It runs every 8 to 24 hours. It runs beat to beat at 0.3 volts above the threshold, and it detects loss of capture and provides backup pacing. Biotronic, the search is every 15 minutes to 24 hours. Safety margin is 0.5 volts above the threshold. It does detect loss of capture, and it also provides backup pacing. The last thing I want to mention about battery is the size, and we know that the size of the generator is very important to our kids. My surgeons are always asking, why am I bringing such big devices for tiny babies that we're doing in the operating room? And what I've realized is they're really not that much different in size. I thought maybe one might be smaller than the other, but they're all relatively the same. So I'm not going to go through the sizes of all of these devices. As you can see, they're about 45 by 50 by 7.5 millimeters in size. Medtronic Azure has dual and single chamber devices. Their dual chamber device, the battery longevity is 15.8 years. Single is 13.7 years with a max track of 210 beats per minute. We have to remember that kids' heart rates are much higher, so a maximum tracking rate is important, especially when you're programming for a baby or a very active younger child who can get their heart rates well over 200. For a Boston Scientific accolade, the dual chamber device lasts 16.7 years. This is again on average. The single chamber 11.5 years with a max track of 185. Abbott Assurity, dual chamber lasts 13.9 years battery and 9.4 for single, a max track rate of 210. Biotronic Endura, 13 years for single, 9.3 years for single and 13 years for dual. This is backwards here, with a max track rate of 200 beats per minute. When thinking about smaller devices, St. Jude or Abbott had a device called Microny. It was only a single chamber, but it was much smaller, about 2/3 the size smaller. And this battery lasted only 5 years. And I will tell you, when I gave this talk to my colleagues a couple weeks ago in Boston, they did groan a little bit about the simplistic programming of this device. But we do know that was a much smaller device, but obviously with a much smaller battery. And the Medtronic Adapta, that was my favorite device. I thought that might be such a way smaller device, but it's not. It's similar to the rest of them. And this is based on the longest battery life out there. So all these devices listed are the XL or the L with the longest devices, which probably means they are a little bit bigger than your average. The dual chamber device is 15.4 years and singles 9.4 with a max track rate of 210. But I will say that these last two devices have pretty much been discontinued and they're very challenging to find. So the top four are what we need to utilize now. So when I sent this to my surgeons, unfortunately, they were not thrilled because there isn't a significantly smaller device out there for our tiny 5 kilo or less children. ICD size and capacity, the ICD size is dependent on the capability. The subcutaneous ICD we know is going to be much bigger. It's 83 by 69 by 12 millimeters. This is compared to a transvenous, which is 64 by 51 by 13. There is a mini device by Boston Scientific. Mini is the smallest. It is a 41 joule, which is standard for even the other transvenous larger devices. It's much smaller. It's 26.5 cc's. It's 9.9 millimeters. This is compared to 30 to 33 cc's for a transvenous device and 11.3 millimeters. Again, this is a smaller device, 52 by 7 by 99, so can be utilized in maybe some of your smaller patients who require a transvenous ICD. The last thing I'm going to talk about is remote monitoring. We know that remote monitoring can be alert-based. It can provide routine information as well as the alerts, as I said. All of the devices out in the market now are wireless or Bluetooth, except Medtronic Adapta, which still lingers in some of our patients. We know that we need to tailor the alerts to each patient to decrease this data. My friend Amy Walsh will be talking on this later on in this recording, and this will allow us to decrease the amount of data that we have to go through as long as we are tailoring the alerts so we're not getting everything. There's going to be an HRS statement coming out next year, 2023, which I'm part of the writing committee, which will provide recommendations for remote monitoring, and not just pediatrics, but all of device patients. We know we have to weed through so much information and have to click on all these things to get to our various companies' remote monitoring. Each platform has a different way to get in, unless you're using something like PaceArt. But Medtronic, St. Jude, Boston Scientific ×2 with the subcutaneous and the transvenous device, and Biotronic, they're variable. So you just have to get used to toggling back and forth between some of these and how the reports are read. Some of the things I want to highlight are future directions. We need to push our device companies to do this. I was recently at HRX, which is an innovative conference, talking with industry who are in the room with us about things that we might need in the heart rhythm world. Obviously, pediatrics, we want smaller devices. So this very progressive conference did focus again on having industry with us and having these discussions. This is a picture of my colleagues on stage with some industry representatives up there. The other things that we want to look through it, or we want to support, is thinner yet sturdy leads. We know we want them sturdy. Fidelis has taught us that, but we do want thinner. We want better pediatric programming choices. We want the heart rates to get up higher for children. We want better interoperability for remote monitoring, again, not switching back and forth between various platforms and having more similar types of reports. And then in some instances, remote programming may be very helpful. This technology is already there, but obviously waiting on FDA approval. Wouldn't it be nice if you need to make a quick change, like lower a rate or change a threshold, that you could do it for someone in a county over or even 8 hours away? And that would save a patient a trip, or would save a rep the trouble with going to a hospital, finding this patient and making this change. So our industry colleagues at PedirhythmX did say that remote programming may be possible in the future. I wanted to thank my team at the University of Michigan, who really allows me to do these fun types of talks, and we all work together on this type of thing. And also a reminder that the International SADS Foundation Conference is Friday, November 11th in Houston, Texas. The title is Looking Forward from Cutting Edge Therapies to Patient-Centered Care in Inherited Arrhythmias. You can register at sads.com. And I do want to thank you very much for allowing me to be here today.